Despite all our differences, we share one thing in common. That's right, we all feel alive and actively perceive the present in this very moment. But here's the catch, my friends. This feeling of right now is in fact a little delayed. It takes about half a second for our brains to translate information into our consciences. If you think about it, technically, the future is already done for, but we're just not realizing this in due course. And that's not all. Our different senses pick up information each at their own pace, which means our brains have to drag some of them to give us a seamless sense of the present. It's like our brains are trying to stitch together a Frankenstein monster of sensory information in real time and make it look pretty. But here's where things get really wild. Researchers have found that they can mess with this perception. When that standard delay is removed, our brains get confused, and it gives us the impression that the effect happened before the action that triggered it. It's like you'd perceive the doorbell sound, but before you'd actually push the button. Weird, right? Why are our brains so easily fooled? Well, it's because our conscious minds have a lot of work to do. We have to translate the world around us, think about what might happen in the near future, and figure out what to do next. All of that takes time, which is not great when you're facing fast-moving danger. Imagine a dangerous wild animal jumps out at you. If you have to consciously think about how to react, you're done for. Luckily, our brains have emergency response kits that kick in when we need them most. The startle reflex is the fastest response triggered by a noise or sudden movement. Within 5 milliseconds, a lot of muscles are triggered into reacting, and you're already on the move before you know it. If we have a few more milliseconds, our brains can act in a more interesting way. The amygdala, our brain's first stop shop for processing emotions, takes about 12 milliseconds to process a threat. It's not super sophisticated, but it can easily detect danger. In fact, some of our best actions are done without conscious decision-making. Anything we do in less than half a second, like hitting a ball or catching someone's glance, is done automatically. So, while our conscious minds are great for long-term strategy, some of our best actions are accomplished without it. But let's get down to the real question. Thoughts can vary. Sure, we all know that because we've lived it. Making a difficult career or parenting choice takes a lot more thinking than choosing what to top your ice cream with. But did you ever wonder what the speed of thought is? I mean, do we need a Ferrari to keep up with our brains, or can we simply stick to a bicycle? Well, some scientists have tackled this tricky question by measuring how quickly we become aware of the information we gather through our senses. Apparently, we can detect stimuli that lasts as little as 50 milliseconds. That's about 1/20th of a second in case you're counting. Now, if we're talking about sensing and responding, let's use the sprinter reacting to the starting noise as a benchmark. That's lightning fast, taking only about 150 milliseconds. However, the speed of our nerve pathways can put a damper on our speedy thoughts. Back in the day, scientists estimated that it took 115 feet per second for information to travel down our nerves. But thanks to modern research, we now know that some well-insulated nerves can move at up to a whopping 394 feet per second. That's comparable to a bunch of the world's fastest cars in the world, like an Aston Martin or a McLaren. When you put it that way, the speed of thought is pretty quick. But don't worry, you don't have to train like an Olympian to keep up with your own brain. You might have even stopped to think about how many thoughts you have in a day. That question counts as a thought too, you know. Spoiler alert, it's more than you think. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, and maybe even after that, your brain is constantly churning out thoughts. Some of these thoughts might be simple, like, I need to do laundry, or I should call my mom. Others might be more complex, like, what's the meaning of life? Or how do we love? Believe it or not, a study conducted in 2020 found out that an average person has over 6,000 thoughts per day. That's a lot of thinking. The study used brain scans to track when new thoughts began while participants were either resting or watching a movie. But not all thoughts are created equal. Some thoughts can make us feel happy and excited, while others can bring us down and cause us to worry. For most people, those negative thoughts can be hard to shake. Also, did you know that your personality can affect how many thoughts you have? People who are a bit more on the jittery side tend to have more thoughts than those who are calmer. But don't worry, having a noisy brain doesn't automatically mean there's something wrong with you. Sometimes our brains can even produce intrusive thoughts that are disturbing or upsetting. While it's natural to have these kinds of thoughts occasionally, if they're happening frequently and disrupting your daily routine, it might be worth talking to a professional. So, where do all these thoughts come from? Your brain's nerve cells or neurons are responsible for communicating with other cells by generating neurotransmitters. This sets off a chain reaction of firing neurons, which then creates thoughts. But what if you want to change your thoughts? It's possible. Techniques like mindfulness and working with a trained specialist can help you address unwanted thoughts and give you a more relaxed state of mind. Our brains are somewhat similar to the muscles that help us move around. We can train it to make our lives better. To an extent, that is. At the end of the day, it's not the number of thoughts that matters, but how they affect you and what comes out of them. Speaking of weird stuff brains can do, some mind-blowing news just hit the scientific community. Researchers have discovered some weird brainwaves in octopuses. Yes, you heard that right. These 8-armed wonders feature a type of brainwave we've never stumbled upon in the animal kingdom. Now, before you go imagining little octopuses wearing tiny shower caps with electrodes sticking out, let me tell you how this discovery was made. Scientists surgically attached electrodes to octopus' brains and were able to get a glimpse into their thought processes. The amazing project captured the first ever brain recordings of octopuses that can move around as they please, and the results are mind-bending. The researchers discovered that some of the brainwave patterns are much like some found in the human memory center. This suggests that convergent evolution may be at play here. What does convergent evolution mean, you might ask? It's when two different animals end up having the same trait, even though they don't share a recent common ancestor. Another similar example of convergent evolution is that of dolphins and bats. They both use sound to figure out where they are, but their environment couldn't be more different. Octopuses have been considered fascinating by scientists and non-scientists alike. From their remarkable memories to their ability to camouflage themselves, these creatures are nothing short of incredible. They've been known to use objects to solve problems, and they even dream. Yeah, you heard that right. The color ripples that we can see across their skin as they sleep can show us that they may be dreaming too. However, octopuses are notoriously difficult to study. They can touch every part of their body with those long arms, which means they may have no problem removing whatever tracking objects scientists might have placed on them.
Let's see now. Mobile phones, remote surgery, communication satellites. You think it's just another science show on TV. But wait, the image on the screen is black and white. A middle-aged man wearing glasses is talking. It's a BBC documentary from 1964. The man's name is Arthur C. Clarke. Yep, that's the guy who helped Kubrick make the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. You up the volume and can't believe your own ears. Clarke is describing our present as if he were right next to you. So, what exactly is he saying? The world in which we can instantly contact each other. This is a no-brainer. Clarke was talking about messaging apps. He spoke about how we would be able to contact our friends anywhere on Earth. And the best part is, we wouldn't have to know where they were. Yup, that sounds a lot like using a smartphone. Mr. Clarke, you won't even have to know your friend's number. The device will remember it for you. The phones in the 1960s weren't that advanced. This was the time when manufacturers were just starting to move from rotary dial phones to push-button ones. But Clarke saw further in the future of communication. He told a tale of how a person would be able to conduct business from Haiti or Bali as if they were in London. It was a BBC show, so don't be surprised he mentions the English capital. Anyone who's ever Zoomed or Skyped knows what the man was talking about. Digital nomads were hard to imagine 60 years ago. There was no other way to earn money but to have a 9-to-5 job. Today, you can open your laptop and work from anywhere on the planet. Next up, brain surgeons in Edinburgh operating on patients in New Zealand. Those were Clark's exact words. He was right about this as well. Remote surgery became very real in 2001. A doctor who was in New York operated on a patient in France. How, you may ask? Robotics is the short answer. Did you ever have one of those remote-controlled toys? The basic principle is the same. A surgeon controls a robotic arm performing the surgery. For this, they don't have to be present in the operating room. They can even be on another continent. Clark was spot on with this prediction. Don't commute, communicate. That sounds like an advertising slogan, right? Close enough. This is another example of how Clark saw it all. Recently, workers across the globe got used to remote work. Now they're simply refusing to return to the office. The least they'll accept is hybrid work. That's where you work from your bed for 4 days and then drop by the office one day to say hello. This would have been impossible in the 60s. I mean, you could stay at home, but then you wouldn't get paid. And this is not the end of Clark's predictions that came true. He was a pioneer in predicting the future. In 1945, he wrote an essay called Wireless World. A great title if we take into account that the first Wi-Fi network appeared in 1997. But what was this essay about? Nothing much, just about launching communication satellites into orbit. But wait a second, that was more than a decade before the first artificial satellite started orbiting the Earth. Wow, impressive. Okay, but it's not like Arthur C. Clarke predicted the invention of the internet or something. Well, he did. In 1974, he described a device called console that every home would have. No, he wasn't talking about a gaming console. This console would have a TV screen and a typewriter keyboard, and people would get information from it. Isn't this a desktop computer? Of course it is, but explained in the 70s terms. Clarke could have also added the mouse as well. I mean, he got everything else right. He also predicted what this console/PC would be used for: getting bank statements, booking theater tickets, and browsing the news. This is exactly what we use computers and smartphones for today. And how do we do it? Google search. Arthur Clarke had a vision of what a search engine would look like. Is there anything this man couldn't predict? Well, he believed cities would completely disappear, but they are only getting bigger. The World Bank estimates that nearly 56% of the world's population lives in cities today. This figure will only increase in the future. Sorry, Mr. Clarke, that was a complete miss. Then there are borderline cases. The man spoke about a replicator. Sounds like a gadget from a Bugs Bunny cartoon. That's because it is. A machine that creates instant copies of everything is a bit off the charts. But, to be honest, we have 3D printers today, although they're not as sophisticated as Clarke's replicator. But who knows? This prophecy may come true in a decade or two. The British writer wasn't the only daydreamer of the period. Walter Cronkite, America's favorite TV anchor, also had a go at predicting the future. Just 3 years after Clarke's show aired on the BBC, Cronkite hosted a show called The 21st Century. The goal? To show viewers what a 21st century home would look like. And he was strangely good at it. Let's start with his vision of the living room. Full-color, big 3D television screen? Check. Console controls that operate various gadgets? Check. Music that plays from speakers at a push of a button? Check. Now, I could be wrong, but did Cronkite just describe a home entertainment system? I think so. Hungry for more? Step into the imaginary kitchen from the year 2001. The plates are made from plastic on the spot. Okay, that one was a bit off, but you can still buy disposable plates at the supermarket. That was not the case in the 60s. Also, you had to clean the house yourself back then, or hire help. Well, Cronkite and his guests hoped this would change. They spoke of small-scale robots that would accept instructions. They could even be programmed not to bump into humans while cleaning the home. And finally, these tiny robots wouldn't have to look anything like us. You're probably staring at the robot vacuum cleaner in the corner right now. Now let's talk business. The show imagined the home office with a futuristic printer. It would receive data from satellites and print our newspaper. Sounds naive enough today, but keep in mind that the first laser printer appeared half a decade after the show aired. There was also talk of a closed-circuit camera system. These intercom systems are in every home today. 60 years ago, you had to use a peephole to see who was at the door. But the most mysterious gadget Cronkite mentions is an electronic correspondence machine. They didn't explain its functions on the show, but it's possible they were referring to a smartphone. At the time, the TV remote controller was all but perfect, so this gadget seemed even more impressive. Okay, we all know what you've been waiting for. Flying cars, right? Yes, Cronkite included this prediction in his other show, this time about the 20th century. Every now and then there's news of a tech startup constructing a flying car, but it turns out to be a bust every single time. We can still only dream about taking off and flying over a traffic jam. The show from the 60s got some things about cars right, though. Inflated pillows? They were probably referring to airbags, but misspoke. Cronkite also predicted anti-lock brakes. Manufacturers started installing these into cars decades later. Then there was cruise control and motion sensors. Tracking the distance to the car in front of you seems common today. In the 1960s, however, drivers could only dream about such a function. How many times have you heard your grandparents say how everything was of better quality back in their time? Well, this isn't always a good thing. Traffic signs were solid, so a car would be severely damaged if it hit them. Cronkite accurately predicted that modern road signs would be intentionally weakened to fail and save the driver's life. Okay, so you've seen the movies and read the books on time travel. Most of them tell stories about entering some futuristic boxes, and in the blink of an eye, you're in some different epoch. For now, this is just sci-fi. But there are ways to make time travel possible, at least theoretically. We just don't have the technology figured out yet. For starters, time travel to the future could be achieved by traveling at high speeds, but not just getting a ticket on the superhighway kind of speed. This is based on Einstein's theory of special relativity. It explains that time slows down for objects that move at really high speeds. And the good news is scientists have already tested this theory, and it looks promising. They did it with the help of two identical clocks. One was placed on a jet, and one stayed on the ground. They found that the clock on the jet ticked slower than the one on the ground because of how fast the jet was moving. The faster an object is moving, the more time will slow down for it. Currently, the fastest speeds achieved by human technology are seen in a special type of particles called neutrinos. Some of these can move at almost the speed of light. At these speeds, 1 second for the protons is equal to 11 months for us. Now, we might be able to time travel to the future with the use of gravity, too. This idea is based on Einstein's findings, namely his theory of general relativity. Now, this theory explains that the stronger gravity is, the more slowly time moves. This means that as you get closer to the center of the Earth, the strength of gravity increases. And if you think about it like that, time actually passes more slowly for your feet than for your head. Now, is that why I'm always late for stuff? Good excuse. This effect has been measured too, with the help of the same strategy with two identical clocks. Scientists placed them on shelves at different heights and measured the rate of ticking. The clock on the lower shelf ticked more slowly because it experienced a slightly stronger gravity. But this option comes with a catch. To be able to travel to the far future, you'll need to find a place with extremely strong gravity, like a black hole. That's a point in space where the gravity has so much force that even light cannot escape it. There, gravity becomes so intense that matter gets squeezed into a tiny space. The closer you get to the black hole, the more slowly time moves. However, traveling via a black hole is very dangerous, mostly because it's a one-way ticket. Once you cross its edges, there's no coming back. Now, here's a fun fact. The GPS systems we use on our phones and in our cars already have to account for time dilation effects in order to work properly. That's because of the speed of the satellites they use and the gravity they feel here on Earth. Without these corrections, your phone's GPS wouldn't be able to pinpoint your location on Earth very precisely. Meanwhile, the third option has less to do with the universe's unknown forces and more to do with our own bodies. Scientists are trying to find ways to time travel to the future by slowing down the body's own processes. It's not time travel per se. You wouldn't technically be going anywhere. But if your body stays put for a long period of time, you could eventually wake up in the future. Some animals, like bears and squirrels, can slow down their metabolism during hibernation, which means they don't need as much food and oxygen to survive. Specialists are trying to figure out if humans can do the same thing. They're working on ways to make people go into a short-term hibernation for a few hours to begin with. This could be helpful for medical emergencies too, in order to help a person before they can safely get to the hospital. In 2005, scientists were able to slow down the metabolism of mice by exposing them to a small amount of special gas. However, when they tried to do the same thing with larger animals, it did not work as effectively. Our fourth option of traveling through time is really unique. It involves a special type of shortcuts that may exist in our universe called wormholes. Now, before we move on, let's try to understand what they are. You'll need to picture two balls and a trampoline. If there's no pressure applied on the trampoline, it stays flat. Now imagine the two balls placed on the trampoline symmetrically. If you look at them from this perspective, there's no possibility of them ever touching. But if you put enough pressure on the trampoline between the two balls, this flexible fabric can stretch so much that the two objects might potentially touch each other. The same thing happens with stars in different star systems. They're big enough to curve space around them. That's why most planets tend to orbit around a star. The tunnel between those 2 points would be a wormhole. These wormholes could be used to travel long distances, like 1 billion light years, or even visit different times. Now, many scientists, like Stephen Hawking, think that wormholes might appear and disappear, but be very small, smaller than atoms. The problem is that we don't know how to catch one and make it bigger so that people can use it. This would take a lot of energy, and we don't know if it's even possible. Some astronomers say that even if we could find a wormhole and enter it, it would rapidly collapse on itself. Even the tiniest bit of extra mass, like that of our bodies for example, can result in the wormhole slamming shut, like a rubber band that's been stretched too much. Now, the fifth solution for time traveling was proposed by an American physicist named Ron Mallett. It involves one resource that we know for sure is abundant in the universe: light. The scientist proposed a theory about time travel that would use a rotating cylinder of light. He believes that if something was dropped inside this swirling cylinder, it could be moved in both space and time, similar to how a bubble moves when you swirl it with a spoon in your coffee. According to Mallett, the right shape of the cylinder could allow for traveling to both the past and the future. The physicist has been trying to raise money for an experiment to test his theory. This experiment involves dropping tiny particles, called neutrons, through a circular arrangement of spinning lasers. However, other scientists say Mallett's theory is impossible and there's no need to test it further. Well, even if we eventually figured out a way to travel back in the past or to the future, would it be safe? Scientists have been talking about a problem called the paradox of time travel for a long time. The main question is what would happen if you went back in time and did something that changed the future. However, a new study from researchers from the University of Queensland says that this problem might not be real after all. The scientists have done some calculations and found out that even if you had changed something in the past, the timeline would still end up the same way. Another variation of this problem is called the grandfather paradox. Imagine going back in time and preventing your own grandfather from having offspring. Come to think of it, it automatically means you shouldn't exist in the first place. If your grandparents didn't have your parents, how can you exist at all? Well, these days scientists are certain that even if you did experience something like that, you'd still exist in the present. That's because the timeline that already exists has a way of adjusting itself, regardless of where people are in time and what they do. Or somehow get 1.21 gigawatts in a DeLorean and make like Marty McFly.